All right, we'll get started. So thanks for joining us. You guys did save the best Insight Lab for last, so that's the good news. For those of us who haven't met, my name is Scott Everett. I'm the Content Creative Director.
And I'm Yenny Gu. I'm the Director of Content Marketing.
And so what we're going to focus on today is obviously around content, but we're specifically going to focus on content distribution. This is something that sometimes gets lost in the mix and overlooked in the planning stages. So we're going to go through sort of our broad framework for strategy, and then we're going to drill down into some of the distribution tactics that we find are most effective. So we're all familiar with the bought, owned, and earned framework. And at iProspect, we really see content as underpinning performance across that bought, owned, earned structure. Now, to create a content program that truly achieves tangible business objectives, as Ben and Jeremy talked about, is challenging. That's very difficult. But as a performance agency, that's something that's extremely important to us. So, which is why we have a very detailed framework around how to do that. So when we take that, that infinity loop IP logic that Sam showed us yesterday, and when we apply that to content, this is the framework that we come up with that's specific to content creation and distribution. So, and there are four major steps to this, four major pillars. The first being research and strategy. So as a performance agency, before we spend any media dollars, before we spend any creative money, the first thing we want to do is learn. So we want to put a lot of research, a lot of learning into what we're doing. And the first thing is to really ask the right questions of the brand and understand, where does the brand want to go? What is the brand objective? So if strategy is really the roadmap, how to get to point A to point B, we first want to understand what is point B and define that very clearly. And then the other piece that we need to clearly define is, who is the audience and what's important to them? How do they behave? Stephen he talked a lot yesterday about data, which was was a lot more entertaining than you might think. But what was really cool is he talked about the difference between declared intent and revealed intent. And so for us, that really breaks out into two separate data sets. So for declared intent is that, that survey data set, and for us that's CCS. So those are all the things that our audience is willing to share with us about their preferences, their behaviors, how likely they are to visit this site versus that site, or spend money on this brand versus that brand. And so that data is very important to us, but we always want to balance that against revealed intent. And for us, that's keyword data. So if you think about search, search is a private activity. Even if you're doing it in public, it's not something that anyone else really sees. So because of that, it's a very honest set of data. The most embarrassing thing that you've ever searched for, you wouldn't share in a focus group. You certainly wouldn't share it with me, and probably not the person next to you. And so what that does is give us a really clear picture of revealed intent, so the way that you actually behave and what your true preferences are. So once we've done our homework, all of that research goes into our strategy, which drives our content creation. So, and that's really what informs us about what are the right stories to tell to our audience. So we understand where we want to go and who it is we want to talk to. That's what drives what we're creating, whether it's a video series or content articles or an infographic. The strategy also drives our amplification and distribution. So part of this research process is understanding where our audience is active. So is this particular segment active in LinkedIn or on YouTube or Facebook? Every audience is going to have a different digital behavior profile. And so we want to answer all those questions so we know exactly where to distribute and connect with them on those stories. And then measurement. You all heard yesterday about the importance of A/B testing. This is really where measurement comes in. So the moment we're spending media dollars, we always need to be testing and learning. So testing our initial strategy, testing my assumptions as creative director. Was I right? Is this the best story that the audience is ever going to hear? And then doing creative A/B testing around all of those content ideas. So when we look at the content ecosystem, we think about how we want to structure our content. On one side, we've got home base. So this is brand.com. This is the brand's domain. This is, at the center of that is the brand and the products that they make, whatever services it is that they provide. And then surrounding that is what we call the content hub. And Content Hub is just it's just a way of talking about the framework that a brand uses to create and publish content. So whether it's a blog or a subdirectory under brand.com, this is the home for all of their infographics, articles, videos, user-generated content. So the trick is, how do we surface that content to our target audience over here? Just creating and publishing it is not enough. Just because I create a story that I know is perfect for you because I know a lot of things about you, doesn't mean that you're automatically going to come to my site and look for it. So how do I get that story to you? That's where amplification and distribution comes in. So, and here we see a lot of the tools and tactics that we have available to us. Paid social, native advertising, influencer outreach, and even natural search. So now, again, we're not going to go through all of these today. We're going to just focus on a couple of them because our session would go like 3 hours long. But the trick is, how do we use these tactics to target our audience here? The whole idea behind content is we want to drive engagement and we want to drive traffic back to the site. This audience, though, we don't want to speak to everybody. We want to speak to a very specific group of people. So before we start distributing content and amplifying, the first step is to really understand that distribution and that media landscape.
Yep. And that landscape today has become very complex and very fragmented. So if you think about how your content can reach your potential customer, there are a lot of channels where that can happen. You have your social media, search, major publications like Times or Huffington Post. You have your industry or niche specific blogs. And there are specialty sites that you go to accomplish certain things like LinkedIn. You may go there if you have a challenge at work, you're trying to find a solution, or you're trying to connect on a professional level. You may go to Twitter for real-time news or to see what the people that you're following, what they're posting, what they're talking about. So as consumers, we go to these specific channels for very specific reasons. And if you think about all these channels, we really have a preconceived idea and expectation of what type of content we're going to see there, right? The content format, the style, and tone are all a little bit different on each of these channels. So that creates a challenge for brands and marketers. But it's also an opportunity. So first of all, what that means for us is we want to make sure that your content is not just available on your brand's website or your brand's blog even. We want to make sure they're discoverable on all of these channels or some of these channels. Second is that the key to effective distribution then becomes the understanding of what each of the role each of these channels play and the type of content that is most suited or will resonate the best on each of these channels. So we'll go into a few specific tactics, and the first one is influencer relations. We find that to be a very effective way to distribute content in the social space. What influencer relations is the practice of building relationships with individuals who have a high degree of influence over a specific audience group. And we leverage these relationships with influencers to extend the reach of your content to their audience. So the end goal is not to just reach the influencers, but to amplify through their audience set. And that relationship really should be reciprocal. Otherwise, it doesn't work. The content that we're asking our influencers to amplify should provide value to them as well and should help them create their credibility. And in turn, the brands can benefit from being able to extend the reach of your content through their audience. So as an example, we recently conducted a B2B campaign with ADP where we were challenged to create awareness and reach for their first quarter US job labor market report. So our solution really began with targeting the right audience. And in this case, it was a pretty niche segment of HR and staffing and recruiting professionals with whom the content really resonated the best. And then we leveraged the brand's social channels to reach out to key influencers, build relationship with them, then leverage that relationship for organic social amplification. So everything we did here was organic. None of these influencers were paid to amplify our content. And the results were threefold. First, our content was exposed to over 14,000 influencers and potentially reaching over 5 million of their combined audience set. And second, with this very targeted approach to amplification, we were able to drive measurable uplift in the interest as well as keyword search demand for the report name. So with that increased interest in this report, we also saw an increase in referral traffic back to ADP's website. And finally is really the holy grail of what we do with what we can do with content was that with our granular targeting, we were able to reach some key influencers who saw the value of this content and became potential leads. They actually reached out to ADP to establish a working partnership with them. So this is a good example of how content distribution and content overall can serve the purpose and reach people in all stages of the sales funnel, all the way from driving awareness to leading your audience to drive a specific action to maybe converting them into a lead.
All right, so authority outreach is the next one that we'll cover. So we all know that search is an extremely useful tool for us as users to surface the content that we're looking for. However, as brands, if our content is not ranking, it never really has the opportunity to see the light of day in natural search. And that's what authority outreach is really all about. So whereas with influencer outreach, we are identifying specific individuals who have, in leveraging their audiences, with authority outreach, we're identifying specific publishers. So in the case of ADP that we just looked at, we might look at a publisher like Forbes or like Business Insider. And then what we do as an agency is we actually go to them and pitch content ideas to them. And then we actually create the content and hand it over to them for publication. And so then the content that they publish links back to the target content on brand.com. And what we're doing is we're leveraging not only their audience, but we're also leveraging the authority of their site, their domain, and using that to increase the authority of our brand's domain and ranking of our content. So we'll go right into the example here. So
this is a food brand site that we worked with. And the keywords showing here, we'll take pumpkin cheesecake as an example. So our first step is to identify websites, blogs, publications that are relevant in that space. So in this case, I'm showing Blogger as an example. They cover everything from lifestyle to food to healthy living, fitness. So it's relevant contextually. We also look at their authoritativeness from SEO and technical perspective, because ultimately we want to be able to leverage that authoritativeness and help drive up our client site's authoritativeness to boost their organic ranking. We also want to make sure these sites are of value and are authoritative in the topical space, which is food, right? So we look at their social presence, we look at their engagement level of their current content, to make sure that there are readers and their content is interesting to those readers. We then developed ideas and created a content, and I'll give you an example for pumpkin cheesecake specifically. We created an article called 5 Desserts That Has Hidden Vegetables in Them. So as you can see, it's relevant to pumpkin cheesecake, but also relevant to the site that we're pitching. And as a result, we were able to drive that particular keyword, which has very high search volume, highly competitive, it's non-branded, from not ranking at all organically to number 3 in Google. And we were able to do that in 5 months time period. So just a quick note, the duration that it takes and the number of articles that is needed for publication will vary depending on the keyword competitiveness, will depend on where you start, how much equity your brand has at the beginning of the campaign, and how competitive those top ranking sites are, right? So if there's a huge gap between where your site is and where those top ranking competitive sites are, we can expect to see a longer engagement timeline, more article needs to be published, etc. So video is another one that we want to highlight, because we all know video consumption increase has been kind of exponential in the last 2 years. And from the Facebook session yesterday, we know that it's not just a phenomenon on Facebook alone. It's really across the board as the type of content today's consumer like to engage with. So, and YouTube is still the largest, video channel today, even though Facebook is becoming a bigger competitor. So your content's ability to surface organically on YouTube has incredible value. And we want to talk about what are some of the ranking factors for your video content. The first one is a no-brainer, right? The higher number of views that you have, the more likely your video will rank higher. But the second one is really, if you want to achieve top ranking fairly quickly, YouTube also look at the speed of view increase upon the initial release of the video. So as soon as you launch a video, YouTube wants to see how much popularity you're gaining, how much view you are gaining in a short time period. And they take that into account for your organic ranking. The third is your content's quality over time. So that means they don't want a one-hit wonder. They want a content creator who can deliver a quality video over time and consistently. And they attribute that to your channel authority. Last but not least, your content's engagement and shareability plays a big role. And that can be comments and likes on YouTube itself, as well as embeds and inbound links to your video content from outside of the YouTube platform. So we have a lot of factors we need to optimize. Can be challenging, but we can help develop customized campaign to help bridge the content and performance gap and make sure your video is more rankable. So the BlackBerry example that we have here, they created 3 videos that were a part of a bigger product launch initiative. And before we started our promotion, the combined video view were less than 30,000. And these videos really weren't gaining any initial traction. So what we did was use a mixed tactic, including YouTube TrueView as well as promoted video ads that were, very contextually relevant and targeting at people who would have similar interests. So the result was we were able to reach a large but targeted audience, and in less than 2 weeks, we increased the video view by 27-folds. So that momentum and the amount of view increases in short time period then drove these videos to rank on first page of the YouTube homepage, which is huge. It gets a lot of visibility and a lot of additional organic views, as well as the science and technology category, which is super relevant to BlackBerry. So we talked about 3 specific tactics, but what I also want to convey is every content piece can benefit from the right mix of a combination of distribution tactics. So a good example here is T-Mobile, who has been a longtime client of ours. And we developed a content program for the last 2 years where we're both creating and distributing content for them. One of our most significant efforts has been around driving organic ranking increases for some very competitive and non-branded terms. And most notably, we were able to maintain top 3 ranking spots for the keyword cell phone. And at certain points, the T-Mobile page for cell phone was actually outranking the Wikipedia page. So that was pretty impressive. But as a part of this long-term content program, we also developed these fun, interactive content pieces, such as the online quiz. And we concepted the idea, we built out a piece, and then we hosted on the T-Mobile website. And then we leveraged a combination of distribution tactics, including influencer relation, native advertising, and retargeting. And we were able to drive over 100,000 visits to this page, and of those, 40,000 of them took the quiz, and then was exposed to the ETF program that we were promoting for T-Mobile specifically. So it was also actually recently referenced by the BuzzFeed managing editorial director as one of their most viral posts of all time. So that kind of shows you the amplifying effect you can have by using a combination of tactics.
All right, so we've gone through a lot of examples with what we think are pretty impressive results. And The only way that we're able to drive results like that is the right mix of budget between content creation and distribution. And so one of the big questions that we get a lot is, how much should we budget for distribution? What's the right blend of budget between those two? And for us, what we see as a good rule of thumb is a 1-to-1 ratio. So as a baseline, plan to spend as much in distribution as you do in creation. And that's just like your starting point. You can absolutely go beyond that depending on what your goals are. So, but just from a good rule of thumb, when you're doing your sort of broad strokes quarterly and biannual planning, this is really a great baseline. So that is it, and we actually have a couple of minutes left. So, questions? Yes, ma'am.
Let's say I have the most boring brand of all time. How are you going to create an interesting piece of content that can be amplified to my most boring audience ever?
So that's such a great question. So the question is, if my brand is really boring, how do I create stories that are engaging? I think that there's no such thing as a boring brand. My view truly is that every brand has interesting and engaging stories to tell because every brand is made up of people. And people are always interesting. So it's really, I think it's about digging down and really digging those stories out. So I think sometimes brands, especially when you're inside of a brand, it's much harder to tell your own story. It's just like it's hard to talk about yourself. So getting an outside perspective can be extremely helpful doing that. So there aren't boring brands. There are just I think there are just boring ways to think about brands, and the trick is to change that perception and to bring those interesting stories out. So yes.
Well, and I think that's also where search really comes into play in terms of being able to figure out what people are actually searching for, even if it seems boring. There are still going to be people looking for it, as well as the CCS piece. You can find out about what those particularly boring people really like to do, and appeal to them from whatever boring directions.
Exactly.
The keyword being boring.
Yes, sir.
So to kind of piggyback on some of that, I think one of the things that kind of amazes me about your team is you're often not talking directly about what the brand is actually doing with their product or as a company. You're talking about supporting information. You're talking about the industry that they're in. You're talking about other things. So that brand may not have a message. So from a true PR perspective, this is a bad month. There's nothing going on.
Yep.
But in the industry, there's interesting things, and your brand may have a point of view about them. There's a lot of stuff that I've seen you guys, like the Dell, we always used to use the Dell computer one, right? The Dell computers, when a robot's going to take over the world, who's smarter, and it has nothing to do with computers, right?
Exactly.
But it's something that you can loosely connect and have a point of view on and amplify your brand without talking about your brand message.
Exactly.
Building that relevancy to interesting things that are happening in your industry and not necessarily just with your brand.
Too many online quizzes is T-Mobile, right?
And
so,
yeah.
Nothing to do with T-Mobile.
Exactly.
Except what it does is tell a story about T-Mobile's value as a brand. Like, what are their core values? What's their attitude, and how does that mesh with their audience? So, all right, guys, I'm sorry we are out of time. Listen, find us when we have drinks, and we will answer questions all night. We love to talk, so come harass us. You bet. Thanks, y'all.